It is being billed as a make or break budget. Much is at stake for corporate India. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley for sure knows that, and I think we've got three of the finest minds in corporate India to join us and analyze what really can the Finance Minister deliver this time around. We've got Mr. R. Seshasayee joining in from Chennai, Keki Mistry with me right here in the studio, and we've got Akhil Gupta joining in from Delhi as well. Keki, I want to start off with you firstly. Have expectations from Jaitley's maiden budget in a sense run way ahead of reality? What's your view?
Not my sense. My sense is that the government will deliver. Maybe people are expecting too much from one budget, but let's not look at one budget per se. I don't think we can expect too many tax reforms in one budget, but certainly the policy framework on how the government intends to go forward is something which will be laid out here. So I don't think markets should be disappointed at all.
Mr. Seshasayee, comment on that. Do you think that markets will not be disappointed? You know, the fear really is that so much is being expected from this budget. And at the end of the day, you know, the finance minister doesn't quite have a magic wand and he has serious constraints on the fiscal side.
Yes, I think, Sandeep, the question that you should really be asking is what the industry should not expect from the budget. I don't think, industry should expect that the budget would be some magic button which will start delivering, spewing out escalating growth rates from Q3 and Q4. Because industry knows that this is going to be a tough proposition you got several challenges, particularly in the context of somewhat unfavorable global environment, a lot of headwinds there. Despite that, if we have to deliver, we still have to do several things. Get the fisc right, cut the subsidies, get the inflation under control, get some investment back into the system, ginger up very bewildered bureaucracy. All of that can't happen and you can't get the growth rate. So industry should not expect immediate results. What industry should expect is the right kind of direction. The budget should say the right things, move the economy in the right direction, and I would even argue that if we have to move in a sustainable growth path, it's not unreasonable to expect correction and maybe a hockey stick kind of a revival. We should be prepared for that, and I think that's the right way of sustaining high levels of growth.
Prepared for a tough budget. Akhil Gupta, I know you represent sectors in the economy that traditionally haven't had too much expectations from the budget, but do you think this budget is a make or break exercise, or do you think too much is being made out of it?
I think, to my mind, all those who are going to judge this budget based on the long list of demands, mostly concessions which have been sought by various industries, if anybody is going to judge as to what percentage of those demands have been accommodated in the budget, I think those will be severely disappointed because that's not possible. But those who are going to look at this budget, in terms of setting the right direction, sending the right message, and laying down the right policies, I think they are in for some very good, pleasant, I wouldn't call it a surprise, but I think they would find it very positive. So to my mind, the finance minister really, instead of wasting time on looking at thousands of specific demands, if we can concentrate on a few things in terms of tax measures, for instance, retrospective tax amendment, withdrawal of that, the GST, war on black money, withdrawal of exemptions, lowering of taxes. On the other hand, obviously, he has to kickstart this economy. Therefore, big layouts on infrastructure, education, healthcare, and of course, defense. Unfortunately, no escape from that. But how does he balance the fiscal deficit? I think he has got several ways which I'm sure he is going to explore in this budget. One is, of course, better tax collection. The second is the disinvestment in PSUs, which, of course, they have to now get to 25%. He will rationalize subsidies. And so I think some of these measures, and last, of course, which concerns telecom industry as well, auctioning the resources which are held by the government and badly needed by the industry. Right. Spectrum, for instance, of 3G in our case.
Sure.
I think all those who expect these kind of measures would be quite delighted.
Sure. You spoke about the fisc and so did Mr. Seshasayee. Let's get a word from Mr. Mistry, really. 4.1 was a target set for this financial year. It looks unrealistic. I don't think anyone expected the government to get there. Do you think we can afford fiscal slippage? Do you think the priority now should be on reviving growth, or should the finance minister adhere to serious amount of fiscal discipline? What's your view?
My view is that a 4.1% fiscal deficit for this year looks very, very difficult, particularly in the context of the fact that this government would, in my sense, start looking at long-term issues rather than the immediate short-term issues, which means making serious investments in infrastructure, which means creating new towns and cities, and so on and so forth. And therefore, my sense is even if the fisc slips a little bit from what the original target was, the 4.1, I think it should be all right. My sense is if we can get around 4.5, which is maybe marginally better than where we were last year, people should not be unhappy.
Mr. Seshasayee, 4.5%, is that acceptable to you? Can we afford some amount of fiscal slippage given where we are, as far as the economic growth is concerned?
No, I think what is important is to hear from the finance minister the road ahead in terms of what he believes would be the target for fiscal consolidation over the next 4 or 5 years. So in the current year, yes, I think 4.5 looks more practical than ideal, but that's where we should start. But so long as the resolve is coming through clearly that would be the direction in terms of consolidation, then I think there will be a lot of comfort to the market. That said, I wanted just to go back to the two very important points that were made by both Akhil and Keki. One is that industry should not expect in this budget, again, all the usual laundry list of concessions to be accommodated, because this is not the way to move forward. I think we have to come to terms with the fact that what we require is an overall economic growth scenario, overall investment-friendly scenario in which we have to compete in the marketplace. Of course, there are a few anomalies to be corrected, there are a few fine-tunings to be done, all of that is fine. But to expect the government to bail out industries which are in trouble or industry segments which are in trouble by writing out checks by way of concession, that era should be over. Industry should not expect that. And I would also echo what Keki Mistry said, that I think it is important that the long-term goals, the long-term road is visible. If we are talking about 100 cities to be done, it's not that proportionately 20 cities will have to be accommodated in the current year's budget. But so long as there is a way forward that is clear in terms of how this is going to happen, in what manner private investment is going to come in, what will be the catalytic role of the government to make that happen, if those are evident in this budget, I think there'll be it's a phenomenally successful budget.
Sure. So you're saying we should expect a tough budget, and India Inc. needs to, in a sense, relook at its own expectations. I think that's a fantastic point that all three panelists here have made. But Mr. Gupta, will it be a tough budget? Do you think, given the scope of the mandate that this government has got, do you think it'll take tough decisions on cutting back subsidies? We've seen some baby steps on that front, but do you think they'll go the full distance? Will we move towards things like diesel decontrol, a cut in fertilizer subsidies? Will they take tough decisions in their first budget?
Well, I really hope so, because the best time to take tough decisions is when you have just been elected and there's a long road ahead. So if not now, then when? So I really hope they do take some real tough decisions in this budget. And I therefore feel that if they can contain the revenue deficit, even if the fiscal deficit then goes up because of larger layouts and allocations for infrastructure and so on, I don't think that should be a cause of big worry.
What could possibly constrain the government from taking a few tough decisions are the two variables that have come into play over the last month or so, Mr. Mistry: a poor monsoon and, of course, the geopolitical tensions in Iraq. How much of that will that be weighing in on the minds of the finance minister as he presents his maiden budget?
As far as monsoons are concerned, clearly it is something that directly impacts all of us in India. My sense is, talking to people around, that even if we get a revival in July, and fortunately, since the last couple of days, we have seen some bit of revival of monsoons. It may not be as much of a worry as one thought a week ago that monsoons could be, but yes, it would be a cause for concern. The second is the Iraq issue. Yes, Iraq by itself can be a problem. But sooner or later, I would hope that Iraq gets resolved. The problem would be the Iraq issue gets starts spreading into other countries, because then it can really result in oil prices going higher, and then the ability of the government to start cutting subsidies and doing things may become a little restricted. So I would keep that at the back of the mind, but I don't think it's that much of a concern at this point of time.
Mr. Gupta, you made the point about the retrospective tax. In a sense, many believe that could be the biggest signal that could come out of this budget. The biggest signal for corporate India and for foreign investors really is what does the government do with the retrospective tax? Do you think he will axe the tax?
Well, I think this is definitely the biggest signal they can give to the community at large, that India needs business. They can trust Indian government, they can trust Indian laws. We will not be arbitrary. And I also feel that this is the smallest price to pay by taking the bold step of just reversing that, I would say, unfortunate decision which was taken. This could go a long way in reviving the confidence in India.
Mr. Seshasayee, it isn't just retrospective tax alone, because over the last couple of years we've seen a whole lot of confusion over the entire taxation regime, especially for MNCs and even for domestic companies doing business in India. Is there time that we get much needed clarity on taxation policies? Is that something that you'd look forward to as well?
Yeah, I think this is a very important issue. I think we are perhaps a bit overly obsessed with this retrospective legislation and the need to scrap that. That's important. But equally, prospective legislation, prospective tax administration and the tax policy regime, I think is also an equally important thing. I mean, the industry would be delighted, the market would be delighted, and foreign investors would be absolutely delighted if there is a sort of a roadmap in terms of how we're going to move forward in terms of tax rates. How are you going to be looking at conflict resolution in the future? How are you going to be looking at advanced ruling in the future? If those signals are coming out, and if we say that, okay, there's going to be some tightening of the belt, now this year there's going to be therefore some escalation in rates, but here is how we're going to taper that down in the next 5 years, and this is going to be a stable policy regime that we are promising for you guys, I think that would be a fantastic message again.
The other big signal, Mr. Mistry, is of course GST. It's a pity that we talk about it every year, year after year for the last several years. I'm sure corporate leaders like you must be tired of talking about the need to bring in GST. But what's your sense? Do you get a feeling that this time around we are likely to see a more credible roadmap for the rollout of GST?
I think so. I think we will see a more credible roadmap for GST to be rolled out. But whether it can come in this budget itself, I have my doubts, because it needs support from the states. My sense is we have a couple of state elections coming up, and BJP would like to have a larger say in some of the states before they come out with GST. So I would say wait maybe one more year for GST, but so long as a roadmap is laid out which clearly shows that GST is coming in, that should be fine. But I completely agree on what was said earlier about the need to bring in tax reforms, to bring in simplicity in interpretation of tax laws, because the amount of disputes that have been taking place in the last several years, and I'm not referring only to Vodafone, I'm referring to day-to-day matters which all companies are facing, I think those issues need to be put to rest once and for all.
Let's talk about the manufacturing sector, because again, this is a pretty crucial budget for the manufacturing sector. Both, this government really, when it went to polls as well, made a pitch for reviving the manufacturing sector so that, job creation happens. Mr. Seshasayee, realistically, what can we expect from the government in this budget to revive the manufacturing sector? You yourself made the point that industry can't just look to government for concessions. So if it's not going to come in the way of tax stops, and there is some concession there with the extension of the excise duty relief for auto and capital goods, but what can the government do within the framework of the budget to revive the manufacturing sector?
From the point of view of the budget, and we look at merely budget as an instrument of fiscal management and looking at just the taxation issue, anything that you do to revive manufacturing through the instrument of taxation is at best a palliative. What this country needs is a very different kind of a paradigm. If you just take into account the fact that today there is no shortage of manufactured goods. All the needs of this economy are being met. That only means that unless there is growth or there is export, You can't have manufacturing going back to the dream levels that we have had in the past, or the target levels of 25% of GDP and so on. And the only way that it can happen is to bring the MNCs into India through the SEZ or the Manufacturing Economic Zone, whatever name they are called. If you get them to come and build large-scale manufacturing operations, not only for the domestic market, but also for the world market. In other words, replicate what was done 3 decades ago by China. That, I think, is what we should expect to see. If there is going to be some kind of an indication in this budget to say, we're going to revive this whole concept of SEZ, never mind what it is called, it can be called by any acronym. So long as there is an invitation to overseas manufacturers to come into India and create the manufacturing base, then we will begin to see manufacturing revival taking place. But if it is going to be just a taxation-related thing, an excise duty reduction here or a customs duty reduction there, I'm afraid that's not going to deliver us from evil.
Mr. Mistry, would you agree with that?
Totally
the fact
agree.
that we need to do this to, in a sense, improve the competitiveness. Because, even look at the way we've solved the problem of current account deficit. Short-term measures, but done little to improve the competitiveness of the economy. Is this what we need right now?
I totally agree. I don't think short-term measures are what are required. A little cut in customs duty or a little cut in excise duty is not going to get us anywhere. We need to lay down a framework for long-term growth. SEZs is a great idea. We need to create jobs. Manufacturing creates jobs. And once we create jobs, because India is a domestic economy, the growth will just happen on itself. Once jobs get created, income gets generated. As income gets generated, consumption increases. As consumption increases, demand increases, and more manufacturers produce more to satisfy the demand. So we need to put in place a framework which enables companies to buy land at a reasonable rate. Buying of land should be easier. Ease of doing business should be, very, very clear. India ranks, I think, 134th out of 189 countries in terms of ease to do business, process of granting approval. So it's a whole lot of things rather than just a little bit of concessions here and there on tax.
I'm sure Mr. Akhil Gupta will have more than a thing or two to say on ease of doing business, especially in the telecom space here in India. But Mr. Gupta, long way to go before we can, in a sense, make it easier and friendly for both Indian companies and for MNCs to do business in India?
Well, I think some steps need to be taken to reassure, because India is an attractive destination. On the manufacturing front, where I think there is massive scope, I couldn't agree more with Seshasayee. The way government can act is by having bigger layout on infrastructure, creating what they call industrial corridors or smart industrial cities. For example, you would have all read about Neemrana, which is being developed as an industrial hub in conjunction with Japan. I think we need many more of these, and automatically a whole lot of investment, whole lot of job creation would then start happening.
But Mr. Seshasayee, if we need to improve our manufacturing competitiveness, it's imperative that we address the issue of land and labour reforms. Let's talk about land first, because there's been some movement on that front. We see the government having a relook at the land acquisition bill. But do you get a sense that it's to the interests of the industry, or do you think it could move towards more populism because they're trying to get more state governments on board? I'm not sure what kind of dialogue is happening with industry. Are you hopeful that the land acquisition bill will be relooked at to make it easier for corporate India to acquire land?
Certainly, I think this will be relooked at, because it has become one of the big challenges facing industry, and therefore we have heard noises now that that's going to be relooked at. But my worry about that is that it should not just be relooked at, and it should not be tweaked to, let us say, bring down the duration from the current estimated 48 months to, say, 42 months or something like that. This is not going to solve the problem. Tweaking is not going to solve the problem. I think in the land acquisition bill, we have compromised on two very, very important matters which are very crucial to the development of manufacturing. One is that land aggregation has issues relating to title. And the way that this has been tackled in the past is that the state had stepped in and had acquired, and therefore had sanitized the title issue. Therefore, industry could acquire from the state and move forward without having to worry whether there's going to be some kind of a court intervention because of a title dispute of some little parcel of land out of a total aggregated land mass. Now that is something which is very crucial, considering the fact that we have very small holdings, aggregation is usually done by coercion. This is going to be a crucial issue that needs to be addressed, and that cannot be done without scrapping the legislative issue. The second is the issue relating to rehabilitation. Now this is very important. I think the industry, if I may say bluntly, had been taking this for granted, that as long as they could get this land from the state, somehow the rehabilitation issue and the replacement issue will be taken care of by the state. But that's not quite responsible on the part of the industry. I think we should have addressed this in the past. We should address this in the future. But to legislate the kind of requirements that have been put down in terms of impact study and all of that, that I think is going to be an extremely difficult situation. So we need to find a new paradigm for that, and I don't think we have enough time to talk about that. But there are new other paradigms, and this is what we should look at. Therefore, a complete overhaul of the legislation was what is required, not tinkering. And tinkering is not going to solve the problem. But I see one major constraint, and that constraint is that perhaps you have the majority in the government, but the political party. But let's not forget that you still have 60% of the people who did not vote for this government, and they are going to take to the streets to demonstrate, and that's something which I'm sure the government would be very sensitive about, and I hope that that does not come in the way of the overhaul of the legislation.
The legislation needs overhaul and not just tinkering. Labour reforms, Mr. Mistry, something that hasn't been addressed. We've seen some movement on that front at a local level, say in a state like Rajasthan. But do you think it's time that we address the key issue of labour market reforms as well?
I guess it's time we address the issue. Whether the government can address the issue now or just again, I don't think the budget is the mechanism through which labour issues can be addressed. But over the next 3 to 6 months, if we start seeing some reforms coming around on the labour front, I think that will go a long way in encouraging industry to invest.
Mr. Gupta, FDI reforms. Again, a lot is being expected on FDI. I think industry is now reconciled to the fact that we're unlikely to see FDI and multi-brand retail in the near term. But outside of multi-brand retail, what are the sectors that you think the government needs to take quick decisions? Insurance, for instance, it's been pending for years now. Are you hopeful that some action will come through in this budget? Defence?
Well, I think they made it apparently quite clear that they are for FDI in virtually every sector. As far as retail is concerned, I think let's give them the benefit of doubt here. I think they had something specific in the manifesto. They have stated that they would, revive a debate on it. Let's give them some time. It's impossible for them immediately after winning the election to completely reverse overnight what they had stated in the manifesto. But I'm sure the will to bring FDI and to will to bring FDI in every sector, including insurance, is very much there. And I'm very hopeful we'll see a lot of action on this front this year.
Mr. Mistry, we were chatting before the show began about the possibility of some sort of an amnesty scheme this time around as well to unearth the kind of black money that we have in the economy. Do you think it's a good time now to go ahead with it? And more importantly, do you realistically see it happening given the whole election rhetoric against black money?
I think we as Indians need to recognize that there is enormous amount of black money in this country. It's extremely unfortunate that in the last budget, with what the finance minister said, that there are only 40,000 individuals who declare an income of more than ₹1 crore, which I think is complete nonsense. So we know that there is black money. Now, when there is black money in the country, which is actually pushing up inflation, because whatever RBI does to control inflation is getting mitigated by this black money and the spending of black money, I think we have to find a mechanism of channeling that black money into the right sources. So I would suggest strongly that we should have a tax amnesty scheme. First, we should go aggressively after people who have undisclosed income, then come out with an amnesty scheme, give people 3 or 6 months to, or maybe 4 months to declare their right income, convince them, tell them that we are not going to go after you once you've declared your income, collect, say, 40% tax instead of a normal 33 or 34% tax, so you pay a little penalty on that. The remaining 60% the government can retain for a few years, maybe 5 years, maybe 7 years. It could be an interest-bearing bond that the government could issue to those individuals, and at the end of 7 years, the money could be paid back with interest and principal, with interest. But during the course of that 7 years, that money could be used for development of infrastructure. It could be used for creation of new towns and cities. If you look at new towns and cities today, if you look at the top 100 cities, they are built on 0.1% of India's land. but they account for as much as 43% of India's GDP. So if you create more towns, if you create more cities by true infrastructure and through the ease of, through by providing some incentives for industry to move to those places, you can see a huge increase in GDP over the next 5 years.
I think we've got some fantastic suggestions really in this short discussion really on what to expect from this budget. Some of the finest minds in corporate India giving their views on what the finance minister could potentially do. Mr. Seshasayee, I'll let you have the last word then. You think corporate India now needs to keep its expectations under check and that the budget should be judged by its intent?
Yes, absolutely. I think the corporate India has to look at the medium and the long-term future rather than judge the budget in terms of its short-term impact. As I said, I will not be disappointed even if we grow on the basis of a hockey stick formation with some moderation correction in the few quarters following and then have a sustainable high growth rates. And I think that's what corporate India should look for.
A bitter pill is what everyone needs if we need to look forward to the Achhe Din that has been promised to all of us by this new government. Mr. Seshasayee, Mr. Gupta, Mr. Mistry, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us in this special telecast on India Inc.'s expectations from Arun Jaitley's maiden budget. Thanks so much for watching this show.